Hello, everyone. This is Janet, and I'm so happy you're here today. So, today we're talking about the power of forgiveness, how it can help caregivers. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. So, as we wait for everyone to arrive, let me mention that my next webinar is on June 5th, so mark that in your calendar. The topic is The Pressure is On, Build Your Caregiver Resilience. You'll receive the link to register in the follow-up email that you'll get sometime tomorrow, later tomorrow. But we'll be recording it as well, so even if you can't make that date, do sign up so you get the follow-up email with the link to the recording. Before we get started, and as people are still arriving, let me share some information about my books and other products. They are available on my website at www.affirmyourself.com, or you can order them on Amazon or your local bookstore. I wanted to mention that if you're interested in finding and purchasing the audiobook on Amazon, make sure to type in MP3 with the title of the book, Finding Meaning with Charles, to get to the correct page. For all the other methods, to get the ebook and the regular printed book, you can just type in the title, Finding Me with Charles, and you'll get right to it. But the audiobook is, for some reason, on a different page, and you have to make sure to mention MP3 as the format. All right, and let me just mention that one last administrative item. To ask me a question, just type it in the question box, which is in the panel to your right, and then hit send. You can do this at any time during the webinar, and I will answer them at the end. Now, before I start, let me quickly tell you a little bit about my background for those of you that don't know me. From a career standpoint, I have a master's degree from Georgia State University and over 30 years experience in leadership within the worksite health promotion field, which included conducting many workshops and training programs, which is one of my loves. However, if you've participated in our webinars before, you know that I took care of my husband, Charles, during the 5 years he faced what we now know was an atypical Parkinsonian disorder, which was a movement disorder which also had some dementia. We initially thought that it might be PSP, progressive supranuclear palsy, or CBD, cortical basal degeneration, but it was confirmed on autopsy to be CBD. I am a past chair of the board of directors for Cure PSP, and I've been a support group leader for 2 online support groups and 1 face-to-face support groups for over a decade now. I currently live in South Portland, Maine. Okay, let me tell you about the biggest challenge I had with Charles during his disease progression and the forgiveness necessary to get through it. This picture is of Charles and his long-term home health aide, who I will call Deedee. Deedee had been Charles's aide for almost 2 years, caring for him 8 hours a day, 4 days a week, so she was there a lot. I so much appreciated Deedee and her special care for Charles. I was very happy to have her, and I in no way fault her for what happened. It all started when Charles would say, "I love you," to just about every female nurse, therapist, or aide. It was cute at first, and I understood that with neurological diseases, people's filters break and inappropriate behaviors come out. I had heard about someone's father with Alzheimer's doing something similar. But then one day, Charles told me directly that he loved Deedee. Again, my intellect understood that the disease was causing this, but it still hurt deeply. While there is a lot more to say in this story, for the purposes of this topic on forgiveness, I'd like to just say that what I did, and explain what I did as a, sort of my confession of Charles's to me. So I first made sure that Deedee was safe and okay. At that point, Charles did not have the physical capability to act on any desires he might have had, so Deedee was safe. But then I had to deal with my own feelings of hurt and betrayal. What was especially painful was knowing how much I was working to give Charles the best rest of life as possible as his caregiver, and he did not seem to recognize or appreciate that. So my first conscious decision was that I would continue to give that same care even though he said he no longer felt he loved me. Charles was a phenomenal man who was deeply loved by many, including me. He deserved no less. Beyond that, I realized that to get through this, I needed to blame the disease in order to forgive Charles. And to do that, I had to talk to the neurologist to better understand how the diseased brain loses its filters. Learning that mechanism made it a bit easier to accept and move forward. In some ways, Charles could not help himself with the raw emotion he felt. But I have to be honest that I also needed to forgive Charles directly. The fact that he no longer loved me, but loved Deedee, to start my forgiveness process, I needed to realize that I couldn't control any of this. I could only control my need to forgive, to let go, and to do my best to be the best person I could be in continuing his care. Let me get to the next slide. Okay. So I'd like you now to take a moment and think about this question. Are you holding a grudge? And maybe it's directly with your loved one. Maybe it's with a family member. Maybe it's with a friend or with an acquaintance. Or maybe right now it's just with a stranger. To determine if you have a grudge, think about whether you find yourself telling the story about what happened over and over in your mind. If you are holding a grudge, and many of us are, you can benefit from this webinar to learn how to forgive. What gets us to this point of pain with these grudges? According to Dr. Fred Luskin, a PhD, it includes these things. First of all, the exaggerated taking of personal offense. Then the blaming of the offender for how we feel. And then finally, this creation of a grievance story that we ruminate about in our mind. And then by focusing too much on our disappointment, we end up renting too much space in our minds to the hurt. A grudge is a gift that keeps on giving. Misery, that is, said Fred Luskin and Carl Thorensen in this article. Holding a grudge or grievance works against us as we often ruminate on that grudge. Rumination is the capacity of our mind to endlessly dwell on things that went wrong. It's sort of a protective mechanism that has gone awry. We are trying to protect ourselves from bad, but when we ruminate, we get metal grooves that become challenging to replace. They just get etched in deeper and deeper. And because bad things happen does not mean we have to dwell on them. Ruminating takes a lot of brain capacity and energy. While we are ruminating, we then don't have the capacity and energy to focus on the good things around us and our good fortunes, which are probably happening at the same time as the bad. We would be better off if we gave up on that thief of rumination and allow our brains to focus more on the good in our lives. Missing the beauty in our lives is the unanticipated damage that grievances can create. Let me say that again. Missing the beauty in our lives is the unanticipated damage that grievances can create. Before we start to talk about what forgiveness is and how to apply it, let's review what forgiveness is not. These and much of the material in this webinar are from Fred Luskin in his book and some videos that he has on Forgive for Good. Fred Luskin has a PhD in counseling and health psychology from Stanford University and is the co-founder and director of the Stanford Forgiveness Project. So, forgiveness is not condoning unkindness. When we talk about forgiveness, we are not saying that what the other person did was right. Forgiveness does not mean that you have to think that what happened was okay. Forgiveness is not forgetting that something painful happened. Forgiveness is not excusing poor behavior. Forgiving doesn't mean that it's okay for people to treat us unkindly. However, by forgiving, you might fear that their poor behavior will continue towards you. So you might be a little afraid to forgive. If I forgive this person, they'll keep doing the bad behavior, you might think. So a way to minimize that fear would be to tell them the consequences if they do it again. But so you don't excuse the poor behavior and you let them know that there are consequences going forward. Forgiveness is not denying or minimizing your hurt. Anger and hurt are appropriate responses to painful events. We do not have to be a doormat in order to forgive. Forgiveness is not needing to reconcile with the offender who upset you or condoned the action. And forgiveness is giving up having feelings. Forgiveness is not giving up having feelings. You can have those feelings. They are appropriate. Forgiveness isn't really about the offender at all. Instead, it's about letting go of the anger that eats at you, accepting that you were wronged, but deciding to move on from the hurt. In forgiveness, you seek the peace and understanding that come from blaming people less after they offend you and taking those offenses less personally. So what is forgiveness and what can it do for us? According to Fred Luskin, forgiveness is for you and not the offender. Forgiveness is taking back your power. So forgiveness is the powerful assertion that bad things will not ruin your today, even though they may have spoiled your past. Let me tell you another personal story. This is not regarding my caregiving experience, but instead one I faced in the workplace. This is my friend Cheryl. We met when we worked together in the 90s for a small wellness consulting firm. The founder and owner of the firm, I'm going to call Debbie, that's not her real name, was very benevolent that first year that I worked there. Then, during the second year I worked there, we found out that we would be losing our largest client. Not because of anything we did, but because they had been acquired by another company which already had a wellness program and vendor. So they would not be needing our services. Well, when Debbie found that out, Debbie the owner, she became a bully and a witch toward all of the workers, except for the family members that worked for her, and very much toward my friend Cheryl. During that time, Cheryl and I would talk for about an hour, many evenings, complaining about Debbie and the toxic environment she created. So we were creating our grievance story together. Then, even after we had all moved on, I found that I was still hanging on to my immense dislike of Debbie. I hadn't been able to forgive her for what she did to my colleagues and me. In some weird way, I thought not forgiving her was hurting her. But instead, she probably could care less. It was really hurting me and taking up too much of my brain energy, frankly. I finally learned about the impact of holding on to that hatred when I read the novel by Jeffrey Archer called Cain and Abel. I don't know if any of you have read it. It's been out for quite some time. It tells the story of two men who interacted periodically over their life and grew a hatred, each feeling harmed by the other. Eventually, their kids ended up marrying each other. But because of these two men's hatred, neither of them ever saw their grandkids. Quite a punishment for holding on to hate and not forgiving. After reading this book, I was finally able to forgive this evil manager, Debbie, for my benefit. My letting go of the negative thinking about her brought me immense peace. I never saw her again to say anything to her, and I'm not sure I ever would have even if I saw her. But letting go and forgiving her took a weight off of me. I never condoned her actions, and I still feel they were hurtful, toxic, and wrong. But I am able to let all of that go for my sanity and peace. Let's go through some everyday examples where we might have opportunities to forgive. So one might be just in simple traffic. Someone cuts you off on the freeway. You just need to move on. Another opportunity, your loved one with dementia says hurtful things or accuses you of untrue things because their filter is gone. Another opportunity to forgive might be a close friend or family member who doesn't want to visit you or your loved one, and you just can't understand this. Frankly, I saw this myself, and I hear from it often from caregivers. Another opportunity to forgive might be when someone lies to you. So why is forgiveness so difficult? Here are some potential reasons. Forgiveness is difficult because we stay stuck in the story we've told ourselves about what happened. Forgiveness can be difficult as long as we maintain a picture of the other's villainy and our own virtue. We feel morally justified in our anger and frustration. Forgiveness can be so difficult when we take delight in the suffering we hope the other person is feeling from our withheld affection, because we perversely imagine they deserve to suffer and that the suffering is a learning experience. And forgiveness can be so difficult because perhaps we reason this mutual misery will help them see the error of their ways and become a better human being. I'm a wonderful person for helping them have this life-changing experience. So those are some of the reasons it's so difficult. Joan Borisenko wrote in an article in Prevention magazine after explaining a trivial argument her mother had with her best friend, which tore them apart for a decade, quote, "Buddha would say that my mother's resentment was like a hot coal. She picked it up to throw it at someone else, but she was the one who got burned," end quote. So once again, not forgiving another, especially someone important to you, hurts you. Let's talk a minute about apologies we expect to hear. Dr. Luskin and others suggest that you, number one, don't wait for an apology. Number two, sometimes the person who hurt you isn't even aware that he's done so. Number three, in other cases, he's incapable of understanding or caring. And four, the simple words, "I'm sorry," can be healing, but so is deciding that you no longer need to hear them. This seems to me especially important to consider when our loved one has some form of dementia, cognitive issue, or behavioral symptoms. In many cases, our loved one is not capable of understanding the wrong they have done, and they may not even think about needing to apologize. Some of them lose their ability to have empathy. That's when forgiveness on our part can help free us up. Again, it doesn't mean we won't be angry or hurt, but it doesn't serve us well to sit with that anger and hurt. Should we always forgive and forget? Hamir Kabir, in his article, Is it always wise to forgive and forget, suggests that the answer may be yes in some cases and no in others. If the relationship is important to you and the apology that you hear is sincere, it's best to both forgive and forget. Then you can focus on rebuilding your relationship and develop a plan of how to avoid a similar situation in the future. So you'll see in this chart, that would be person A. However, for an important relationship where you've received an insincere apology, as in person B on the chart, forgiving is still necessary because the inability to do so keeps us trapped in rumination and limits our ability to think clearly or act in appropriate ways. But forgetting may put us at risk of being hurt again. To deal with this, you may need to help create healthy boundaries for yourself. At the other end of the spectrum, when you get an insincere apology from another person who is someone you'll hardly ever meet again, or with whom you have no intention of having a meaningful relationship, like person C on the chart, forgive and forget. Move on. This will help you free up important limited mental energy of your brain to focus on more important things, as we've mentioned in the past here already. Dr. Luskin's scientific research on forgiveness has shown some terrific and important health benefits of forgiveness. People who practice forgiveness experience lower blood pressure and heart rate, reduced levels of depression, anxiety, and anger. They have more and better relationships with others. They feel happier and more hopeful. You may experience an increase in positive emotions and have easier access to feelings of hope, affection, and trust. People who practice forgiveness experience more emotionally strong and more confidence and optimism, and they score higher just about on every measure of psychological well-being. There's a lot of health benefits that he's discovered. In addition to those, though, here are some other benefits of learning to forgive beyond the health benefits. One, we will not be victims of the past. Two, it allows us to regulate, using a process to quiet down a bit with all of our stress and time pressures. Three, it allows us to move on. Otherwise, only hurts us and ruins our day long after the situation is past. Four, if we don't let go, it affects us, our nervous system, biological systems, as well as a reduced sense of happiness and joy. The next one, it helps us to be resilient, which is going to be the topic of my next webinar, talking about resilience. But forgiveness helps us with resilience and having grit. It's good for long-term relationships. It allows us to give more love and care to the people important to us. And it allows us to move on when challenges emerge without holding on to grudges and bitterness. Many of us have heard this quote by Alexander Pope of the 18th century. He was a poet in England. Quote, "Good nature and good sense must ever join. To err is human, to forgive divine." So how do we do this thing called forgiveness? Here are two overarching steps we can take to start the process of forgiveness. The first is to grieve. Recognize that your primary distress is coming from the hurt feelings, thoughts, and physical upset you are suffering now, not from what offended you or hurt you 2 minutes ago or 10 years ago. Grieving after you have been wronged means letting yourself feel the anger, hurt, and trauma in all of its original pain, but not indefinitely. Forgiveness means you make peace with a bitter part of your past and no longer blame your experiences on the offender. Then the second step is to let go. In letting go, it first helps to realize that life isn't fair. Bad things will happen. People will hurt us. However, instead of ruminating on your grievance story, start to replace the negative mental grooves with forgiveness. So let's look at some examples of grudges. One grudge could be, my ex is a bum. Another grudge could be, my parents are not ideal. And yet another grudge could be, my mother harmed me. Forgiveness says, yes, they might have harmed you, but it's a brand new day. So let go of the grooves of negativity and practice skills of forgiveness. By forgiving your transgressor, you take back control of your life. You let go of the anger and hurt by being mindful and focusing on gratitude and kindness. Granted, all of this takes courage and commitment. But that one proactive way that you can let go is, as I mentioned, gratitude. So put more energy into appreciating what you have rather than attending to what you don't have. For example, I have crappy parents and I have these other good things. So one thing that positive psychologists say in regard to gratitude is start your day off in the morning thinking about 5 things you're grateful for. Or you could do that in the evening and focus on what we do have. Now, let's look at other tips that we can use to help forgive. Acknowledge what you wanted. Think about what desires you had with that person. For example, maybe you had the desire to live till late in life with that loved one, traveling, visiting grandkids, walking the beach at night. Maybe your desire was that you didn't expect to have to care for a parent until your kids have grown and are out of the house. Maybe that desire was for just a good partner. Or maybe that desire was you just wanted something different in your life. We tend to complain when desires are different from reality. Give up expecting things from other people that they do not choose to give you. Remind yourself that you can hope for health, love, friendship, and prosperity, and work hard to get them. However, you will suffer when you demand that these things occur from certain people, since you don't have the power to make them happen. Our next tip is to gain some self-insight. What are our responsibilities for the grudges? Oftentimes, we may not want to acknowledge our responsibility for creating the grudges. So first off, recognize that everyone is flawed, including you. Then ask yourself, how much forgiveness have you required for people to be in relationship with you? I'm sure other people have had to forgive you for things that you've done, right? Use some humble truth-telling about yourself, such as, if so-and-so can tolerate me, then I can tolerate others. Another self-insight is to remember that feeling hurt does not automatically mean that someone meant to hurt you. Also, when you blame someone else for your suffering, you believe that someone else is the cause of your pain. Then you need something from him or her to feel better. That is only granting the other person the power to regulate your emotions. Blaming just keeps you stuck. That may only make you feel helpless and wait for their apology in vain. Many times the other person may have already moved on. Remember that a life well lived is your best revenge. Instead of focusing on your feelings and thereby giving power over you to the person who caused you pain, learn to look for the love, beauty, and kindness within and around you. Yet another tip is to look for another way to get your positive goals met than through the experience that has hurt you. Your loved one may not be able to give you what you need, but think about what your ultimate personal and life goals are, and proactively look for other ways you can find what will help you accomplish those important goals, apart from the people who have hurt you. Forgiveness is a skill that can improve with practice. So, first try practicing on easy things and people that don't mean much to you. So, practice when you're in traffic. Practice when you have bad service from somebody. Practice when you see a mistake. Practice with inconveniences. Practice with a rude customer service agent. These are ways to build your forgiveness muscle. If you practice bearing small slights against you without lashing out, you give a gift to everyone, especially yourself. Another tip to get better at forgiveness is to develop a forgiving mind through empathy. Scientists have studied what happens in the brain when we think about forgiving, and they have discovered that when people successfully imagine forgiving someone, this is in a hypothetical situation that they do in the lab, they show increased activity in the neural circuits responsible for empathy. So when we're thinking about forgiving, we're triggering that empathy. This tells us that empathy is connected to forgiveness and is an important step in the process. If you examine some of the details in the life of the person who harmed you, you can often see more clearly what wounds he carries or she carries and start to develop empathy for that person. One way to try to do this is to imagine that person as an innocent child, needing love and support. Did that person get that from his or her parents? Research has shown that if an infant does not receive attention and love from primary caregivers like parents, then that person will have a weak attachment, which can damage trust. It may prevent that person from ever getting close to others and set a trajectory of loneliness and conflict for the rest of that person's life. So much that can be going on behind the scenes for that person. And so by forgiving, you will be using empathy. The next tip in practicing forgiveness is to be kind to yourself as you work toward forgiveness. First, remember that if you are struggling with forgiveness, that doesn't mean you're a failure at forgiveness. Forgiveness is a process that takes time, patience, and determination. Try not to be harsh on yourself, but be gentle and foster a sense of quiet within and inner acceptance of yourself. Try to respond to yourself as you would to someone who you truly love and love deeply. Surround yourself with good and wise people who support you and who have the patience to allow you time to heal on your own. Also, practice humility, not in the sense of putting yourself down, but in realizing that we all have capabilities of imperfection and suffering. Try to develop courage and patience in yourself to help you in the journey. In short, forgive yourself. Finally, forgive for love. As an ABC News story once shared, dance with the one you brought. So you chose your partner, faults and all. Let your partner know how blessed you are. Love is a gift that your partner is giving. See your lover's flaws and failures with loving eyes. Give them the benefit of the doubt. Acknowledge your partner's flaws, but strive to see his or her good intentions. Accept what you cannot change and grieve your losses. Choose to recommit. Give yourself a break. You are just as flawed and need to a good dose of TLC too, coming back to you from their love. Now I ask you to pick at least one of the tips that I mentioned for you to try to adopt. Make that your action plan from this webinar. Then make it a ritual that you'll remind yourself of and do regularly. So now, before I get to my final quote, I'd like to take your questions. I'm going to open up the question box. Oh, my audio keeps cutting in and out. I am so sorry. Boy, Denise, have you been able to catch most of it? Oh gosh, you're hearing background noise. Very annoying. I'm sure the replay is much better. Disappointed. This is the first time this ever happened on her webinar. Wow. I'm going to just change my audio. I'm so sorry. I wish I saw that sooner. Hold on a minute. Let's see. Let me see how I can change my audio. Hold on. Let's see. Audio. All right. I'm going to do this first of all. Lois and folks, I'm using now, I think, the speaker. Is that working? Just going through the computer speaker? Is that working now? Seems to be working now. Yes, that's working. Well, I wonder if there was something wrong with my headset. So I apologize. What I will do, it seems to be okay now. Okay. What I will do is I will find another time to re-record this webinar. So before we actually record this one, I will find a time to re-record it, and then I will send that recording out in the follow-up letters. So I do apologize. I hope I can do that. I'm not sure exactly technically how I can do that, but I'm so sorry. I didn't have the question box open because I was watching my screen and I missed that. So I hope I can, I hope I can get that done for you guys. So I guess you don't have questions because you probably missed a lot of the webinar. I'm so sad to see that. You got to see at least the slides. So let me just wrap up then with a reminder of the next webinar, which I don't know. I tested out my headset. It worked earlier, but I don't know why it didn't work this time. But the next webinar is on The Pressure is On, Build Your Caregiving Resilience on June 5th. I will also be putting this next, when I re-record this, I will put it on my YouTube station. You can subscribe to that or just go under YouTube and search Janet Edmunson and find my YouTube station. And I will be putting this up there as well. And so if I can't get it out to you guys, I will find a way to get it to you. Please know that. All right. Again, you can get my books, my other information at my website, affirmyourself.com, or at your local bookstore. My final quote for you is from Fred Luskin from the book Forgive for Good. We have such short time on this planet. We might as well enjoy it. And I hope that will start with forgiveness. Oh, I didn't start cutting out to the end. Oh, well, that's good to know. Thank you, Robert. So I'm not sure when I started cutting out. Your notes started to come in about a little after 7:30, so I hope you got most of it. Anyway, so thank you all for being here today. Again, I apologize that it cut out. I have no idea why that happened, but thank you for your patience. And again, be watching for the webinar. Email me with any questions you have, and I'd be happy to take a look at them and answer them for you directly. That's my email, janet@affirmyourself.com. And with that, being sad that it didn't all come through clearly, I will say good night. We forgive you. Perfect, Lois. I needed that, and I will move on. Thank you so much, everybody, and good night.